How do you view all this India's relationship with Myanmar vis-a-vis offsetting Chinese influence in Myanmar?
I think, we completely reject that. We are not here in competition with anyone. We are not here to offset anyone. Firstly, these are, I think, sovereign decisions of Myanmar and the Myanmar people, who they choose as their partners. If they choose Thailand or China as a partner over India, this is their prerogative. It's up to us what we can offer Myanmar that will attract Myanmar to us. And we certainly do not think in terms, Myanmar is a big country, there's space for everyone. We are looking to develop our relations, which have a very strong historical foundation, a historical and cultural foundation. It's extraordinary that this historical foundation, the administrative foundation that we had during British rule, so much of that has been lost in these last 50 years, and Myanmar's whole direction has changed. But that's fine. This is, again, a historical reality. We will deal with the country as it is now. And once again, as our economy grows, we expect that these relationships will be re-established and will be revived and reinforced and progress. If you don't mind, I'll also take a minute to talk about India. India has always been a country that has been seen as having high potential, but not performing to potential. I think a lot of that has changed. Firstly, it changed with the reforms that we introduced in the 90s. Then maybe there was a period of stagnation again. But under Prime Minister Modi, we have a number of initiatives and a number of imaginative concepts that are driving this. Make in India is there, Digital India is there. Now we have Startup India. We have a massive financial inclusion program. We have very ambitious renewable energy targets, 175 gigawatt by 2021-22, 100 gigawatts of solar energy alone. The Prime Minister has announced, together with the French President, an international solar alliance of 122 countries to promote solar energy. We are going to be inaugurating a center in just outside Delhi very shortly. India, in some ways, already we have achieved 5,000 megawatts of solar electricity. That's just January. So India is potentially going to be also a major exporter of solar technology. And solar technology is something that Myanmar can easily do with. So, this is another potential area of cooperation. What I'm trying to say is that India is the new sunrise economy. Today, we are the fastest growing major economy in the world, with a number of dynamic initiatives. As I said, coupling manufacturing with digital services and digital technology, smart cities, and so on. So, 2-3 years, the story will tell by itself on the ground. But if you see what is happening, ease of doing business, the quantum of foreign investment coming into India now, the highest amount of foreign investment coming into any country right now is in India. And the domestic reforms that we are also embarking on. The next 3 years, India is going to really grow rapidly and in a very modern way, because the Prime Minister is trying to make a modern economy of India. We have one of the largest skill building programs in the world. This government has set up a full ministry of skill building. Now we have a very strong thrust on solar and renewable energy as well. So things are happening. I think what Myanmar, other countries are discovering it, what Myanmar also needs to discover is that India is changing. Things are happening in India. The sunrise country for the next 5 years is going to be India, technologically and otherwise.
I'd like to go into another important issue, conflicts. You are a seasoned diplomat. You have been posted to the countries like Syria and Afghanistan. I mean, you opened the embassy in Kabul. How do you view the conflicts in Myanmar? And what are the kind of things that Myanmar could learn from the issues and your experience in India?
Right. When I was in Syria, Syria was a peaceful country.
Yeah.
It went down much later. Afghanistan, of course, has always been conflict prone for now several decades. If you look at conflicts, every area is unique. And in some ways, Myanmar is nowhere near as bad as the countries that we are talking about. Seriously speaking, we have, you can call little insurgencies based on a kind of differing notions of what Myanmar should look like, whether centralized or federalized and so on. But you don't have you don't have terrorism. Maybe Myanmar is among the safest and most peaceful countries that I've visited, and I've also traveled in many of the areas that you talk about as conflict prone. Yes, there are clashes. There is a state of, you can say, tension and friction and occasional clashes between government troops and insurgent troops. But by and large, they still follow, by and large, some of the humanitarian community may object to this, still follow the laws of war. There are breaches of the laws of war, but people are not targeting civilians indiscriminately, and civilians are not pawns in a battle between insurgent troops or government troops. Sometimes there are incidents, sometimes there is collateral damage, people get caught in crossfire, there are very regrettable incidents. But by and large, this is if I can use that word, relatively civilized war compared to what we are seeing in Afghanistan or Syria, which is practically nihilist. And even the ethnic insurgent groups, they are asking for more rights. They're not asking for separation, right? So if you look at it in a kind of universal scale, the problems of Myanmar are relatively modest. That doesn't mean, it is of course a big problem for Myanmar. I think Myanmar has a problem of nation building, how to integrate its ethnic nationalities into a larger union of Myanmar. I think successive governments have been trying it. It's not yet complete. I think the peace process that has been initiated has given a lot of hope. Where India comes in, and again, no two countries are comparable. India is different from Myanmar. I cannot say that just because it happened in Myanmar, if you just follow us, this will happen here. For one, in India, the kind of ethnic communities, insurgencies that we had are small by comparison to India as a whole, and in sort of limited areas. Even though we have other kind of movements, radical left movements in central India. But on the whole, in 1947-48, when we attained independence, we had similar problems of trying to integrate some of our ethnic nationalities into the Union of India. And one way or the other, through democratic processes, we were able to do it. There may be some factions that have not yet reconciled and they continue to fight, but increasingly they are factions or factions of factions. The larger group has integrated, but some splinter faction has not. All right? But the government is continuing to work on this. What we have been able to do is we already have a national army where any ethnicity, any religion, any cultural background, any language, we have many languages as well, can find a place. Now we have a constitution where many of these ethnic entities have got their own states. They are governed by their own chief ministers, by their own legislature. The central presence is relatively little in government. We have institutions that we have evolved. We have a 6th schedule of the constitution which devolves and delegates powers to autonomous district councils, even within states, because the makeup of the state is complex, so you have to give minorities within minorities certain rights. Currently, Prime Minister is in fact touring Assam, where these are very live problems still with the Bodos and with some of the other groups and so on. But we are addressing them. It's a work in progress. It's constantly in progress, but it is progressing. So when Myanmar embarks on its political process, India is one of the countries it can look towards to see how it resolved its so-called ethnic issue problems. how the Mizo National Army abandoned the armed struggle and got elected and elected its own chief minister, subsequently lost. We have a Congress government now. How the same thing has been happening in Nagaland. So what kind of political arrangements we made, what kind of administrative arrangements we made, what kind of economic arrangements we made in order to be able to keep these very different and disparate parts of India together as a country. Today, nobody questions India as a multinational country. Throw yourself back to the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union and the breakup of Yugoslavia. The future of multinational states was in question, and people thought maybe India could be the next. But democratically, we have kept the country together, and we have given our ethnics a big stake in our union. You go to Delhi today, you will find people from Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram in all kinds of jobs and occupations very prominently. In fact, perhaps potentially maybe even more than their population.
So is India anyway sort of involved in the Myanmar peace process, because Myanmar has been implementing and having this series of discussions in the last 4 or 5 years with the different ethnic groups.
Yes.
Is India, because you mentioned about Mizoram experience, is there anything that India is involved in the Myanmar peace process?
Again, we are not driving this process. It's up to Myanmar side whether they want to learn from us or not. Our example is available, our expertise is available. Whenever we have been called upon to provide an expert to talk about, let's say, how we address this problem or address that problem, we have been able to provide. We are involved in the sense that, okay, we are one of the international witnesses to the nationwide ceasefire agreement. Our good offices are always available. We are not directly linked with any ethnic group or the other. We have a little bit of a, you can say, a Naga problem on the Indian side, and you have a Naga problem on this side perhaps, but these are very small by the overall comparison. And by and large, the ethnic communities on both sides have a good relationship.
I think I noticed you use the word little insurgencies. I think for those, especially for those ethnic nationalities, they may not agree that, because that is their question of survival and their question of nationality. How about the cross-border issue, especially when you talk of Naga? For example, Naga Kablam group is banned in India, and Naga Kablam group is in the peace process in Myanmar. So how you deal with this issue when it comes to peace process in Myanmar?
Yeah. Well, naturally we have a dialogue with the government on this, and we have a good dialogue with that. I think at this point of time that's all I can say, but there is no misunderstanding. We are consulting each other before we do things.
You mentioned about the Myanmar side not doing enough to get the interest of Indian business. I think I can agree with that. And also you mentioned that the new government hopefully will be able to do. So now we have a new government coming in the next 2 months' time. What are the expectations from a country like India from the new government, especially from the government of National League for Democracy, led by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi? She studied, she lived in India, she have many conferences in India. So what are the expectations from the front, from Myanmar?
I think firstly about Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, I think first and foremost we have to acknowledge and accept that she's a patriot and a nationalist at heart. Her interests are first and foremost Myanmar, and whatever she will do will be in Myanmar's interest. So India is a friend. India was a friend going back to colonial times, during the colonial struggle, after the colonial struggle. Prime Minister UNU had a very good relationship with our Prime Minister Nehru. Those friendships and relationships have continued, and they continue until now. When countries are close, sometimes their leaderships also get close. But that doesn't mean every country has its own interest. Definitely we expect to see changes. With an LD government which is popularly elected, we will definitely see more of the people's voice in government, I think, more of the people's interests reflected in governance. This is a natural thing, it's a good thing. It is what the Myanmar people want. It's for us to respond to it. And given the fact that there's always been a natural sympathy for the democratic movement in Myanmar and India, we will see that these people-to-people relations, which was one of the things that was holding back our relations, should and will thrive. Talking about this, tourism, Myanmar could easily make a much stronger cultural effort in India, tourism effort in India. There would be hundreds of people who would be interested in discovering a country that is so exotic, that is so colorful, but that has been out of the tourist map for the last many years. But for everything, a tourist promotion effort is required. So I hope that I think the old government had already started it, or the current government had already started it, but I hope that this will pick up momentum. Remember, these changes are still 3 to 5 years. Everything does not happen overnight. I think the U Thein Sein government set a certain direction of democratization, of political and economic openings, and also new ways of doing business. And I think a lot has been achieved in these 3 to 5 years. Starting with President U Thein Sein's visit to India in 2011, Prime Minister's visit here in May 2012, then we've had 2 visits by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh for the BIMSTEC summit, and then by Prime Minister Modi for the ASEAN summit. So these relationships are only now, coming out and being able to, and I think the greater democratization that we have seen through this election, a very hopeful election, we will see more of this. And I think those natural relationships that existed between our two peoples will start reviving.
Yeah.